This week we begin the fifth of the 5 books of Moses, the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy. The portion of Devarim and its accompanying Haftarah, the vision of Chazon Yeshayahu, the prophet Isaiah, who casts the most devastating and depressing vision for what he sees as the future of Jerusalem and its impending destruction, is always read on the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, that singular day of national Jewish mourning for the destruction of both temples and all subsequent exiles and destructions that the Jewish people have experienced since. I've often wondered on the unique nature of this day of Tisha B'Av, where we sit and mourn for these 2 temples. Why is it that we feel the loss of the temples so profoundly? You know, we didn't even ask for the temple. The Torah, the book of Exodus, the portion of Truma, relates that God came to Moses and says, "V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham," they shall make me a sanctuary so that I may dwell amongst them. If anyone should feel terrible about the destruction of the temple, it should be God. God wanted it built. God was the one who instructed it to be built, down to the most minute detail. Every single vessel, to every single measurement, to the centimeter, was dictated by God to Moses. If someone would feel, or should feel, despondent over its destruction, it should be the architect and the contractor. Why do the Jewish people feel the loss of a temple that we never even initiated, we never asked for in the first place? It was commanded to us to build. The Talmud in the Tractate of Brachos tells us a fascinating thing, that God every night wails and cries, "Woe unto me that I destroyed my temple. I allowed my sanctuary to go up in flames, and I've exiled my children amongst all the peoples of the world." Again, one wonders, what are you crying about? If there's one being that can change it, it's you, God. You did it. You allowed the destruction to take place. Rebuild it. Why do you sit around and cry for something that you can fix? Human beings wail and moan over things that they feel are beyond their control to address, to rectify. But why would God cry over something that he commanded to happen? He allowed it to be destroyed. He orchestrated its destruction. He prophesied that it will happen. And then you sit around and cry, "Woe unto me that I did it"? If you didn't want it to happen, no one forced you. You didn't have to build a temple in the first place. You then certainly did not have to destroy it. And you don't have to cry over something that was destroyed that you allowed for it to happen. And you can choose to rebuild it anytime you want. And yet it is us that sit and cry every Tisha B'Av. And we wail and lament and we say the Eicha and the Kinos for all the destruction of the temple that we never initiated on our own. That home was God's home that he wanted. It wasn't a home that we requested. My friends, upon further reflection, however, we come to a most salient and profound idea. Of course, God can rebuild the temple anytime he wants. But God, like a loving parent and a loving spouse, does not want the same home, that same temple that we want. You see, the temple that was built in the first place, the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, and the subsequent 2 temples in Jerusalem, were built as a response. God came to the Jewish people and said, "I know you built the golden calf. I know you betrayed me. So I will give you an opportunity that we can build a home together." God instructed Moses to build a sanctuary because the Jewish people were not forthcoming to build a temple to God on their own. The Jewish people were looking elsewhere. They were looking for gods elsewhere. And in the most compassionate and in the most loving way, God tells Moshe and the Jewish people, even after all that, come, let us make amends. And I will give you an opportunity, a home that we can communicate with each other. We can commune and live together. But the Mishkan and the temples come at God's behest as a response to give us the opportunity to come back home, to us to come back and have a relationship with our Father in heaven. But that's not the temple that really ideally should have been built. The temple should have been a temple that we come together as equals, that we should desire to have that home just as much as God wants the V'shachanti b'tocham. Why were we waiting for God to tell Moses, build me a temple so I can dwell with you? Why weren't we there first and say, God, please, we want a place that we can dwell with you, and then you can dwell with us together. The temple that's destroyed, the temple that God's wailing and God's crying over that he allowed to be destroyed, is a temple that he asked to build for himself because he wants to be close to us. He wants to give us the opportunity. But what God really wants for us is to want the temple as much as he does. God wants us to want a home as much as he does. And so thousands of years have gone by, and we cry and we ask ourselves, why? Why did God allow it to happen? God is waiting for us to want it as much as he does. And so 2,000 plus years, we cry on Tisha B'Av, not just for the temples, not just for all those moments of destruction and exile and devastation and the Holocausts. Of course we cry for that. But we cry for something even more profound as well. We cry that we had an opportunity thousands of years ago to build an everlasting home with God. And we were not equipped. We were not mature enough. We were not ready. God gave us an opportunity again, and then a second time, and indeed even a third time. And each time we said, thank you, it's wonderful. But those types of temples don't last. A temple that's thrust upon another individual, a home, a relationship that's one-sided, where God is chasing us, where God is telling us, I want to be with you, and we're not so sure that we want to reciprocate, those temples don't have staying power. Of course, we feel the grief. Of course, we feel it now because we don't have it. And as human beings know, we cherish and we mourn the things that we wish we had, that we took for granted, that we have no longer. And so every Tisha B'Av is an opportunity to try to listen to that wail that God is crying every night when he's saying, woe unto me that I allowed my temple to be destroyed. I allowed my sanctuary to be burnt. My children are exiled. Of course, God can fix it. But God wants us to want to be fixed. We all know you can't rehabilitate someone if they do not want to be rehabilitated, if they don't want to be healed. Tisha B'Av is our moment of mourning, but it's our moment and opportunity to want to be healed, to want to have the temple. When we will want it as much as God wanted it to be built in the first place, it will surely come back. It will surely be rebuilt. And when we do, not only will we assuage God's mourning and God's sadness of what he doesn't have, but God is waiting so patiently, like the patient spouse and the loving parent, that we should come around and say, I know it was your idea, but now we want it as much as you did back then. May God have mercy and have pity on us and gather us all back home. And may we want to come back home and live once again as we did. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Shabbat Shalom.